You've probably heard the expression once or twice before, physician, heal thyself. And I think what Joanne Levine is telling us in chapter 2 of her Working with People book is something to the effect that worker, know thyself. She starts out this text in its effort to help us know how to work with people effectively by directing us first to become aware of what's going on inside of us and to know as much as possible about us before we proceed to try to help others. As I mentioned last week in this particular discussion, I believe the concept of altruism, that it brings a lot of us to the field. We want to help other people simply because we want to make society better. We want to help people in general. Another thing that brings some of us to the field, and I would say this is true for many of us, is that oftentimes we have some personal issues ourselves from our own histories, our own backgrounds. And, well, perhaps we've resolved those issues, perhaps we haven't, but coming into this field sometimes has something to do with those issues, as though somehow we can figure out how to deal with our own issues by helping others deal with theirs. And it's not to say that that's entirely impossible, but it is to say that that's probably not the right reason to come into this field. We're not here to essentially use other people to help us work through our own issues. And I must tell you that from time to time I've encountered such individuals in the profession. Generally speaking, and I say this proudly, these are not people with social work degrees. A lot of times they're unrelated fields, not human services degrees, but working in positions of social work and human services provision when trained in a field entirely different from what we know. And sometimes those individuals, you can tell, are there kind of working through their own demons more or less as they try to help people. And it really isn't a healthy arrangement, and it's not really possible to be of help to others when you haven't resolved your own issues. Now, are any social workers trouble-free and issue-free? Highly unlikely. I can certainly say after 40-some years in the field, I'm very aware of the fact that not all of my issues are resolved by any stretch of the imagination. But I think I have become aware of what those issues are over the years, resolved those that I can, continue to resolve to work on those that perhaps I haven't. But the big thing there is being aware of what the issues are and being sensitive to them so that I'm not playing out my own personal agenda in my interactions with other people. Some of that takes some time, and some of you may actually be in the field for a few years before you really begin to understand how that works for you personally and what those issues may be. And I say that's not a reason to leave the field. It's not a reason to stop doing what you're doing. It may be a reason then to go into therapy if you think that would be useful to you. It may be a reason to at least stop and take heed and find some way to try to settle some of those issues. But it certainly is a reason for you to become very aware and sensitive to that and to honestly evaluate whether or not it's impacting your work with clients. So this is kind of what she's talking about in this particular chapter of this textbook. Human services delivery requires knowledgeable and disciplined use of ourself, and that's one of the reasons why it is that we have to really know who we are, who our self is, so to speak. When we work with people, it isn't just a matter of us going in and doing a procedure and sending the patient on his way or her way. For instance, I may have mentioned here, maybe not, that recently I had cataract surgery, and the clinic that I had that surgery completed in was a masterful array of individuals who had this routine down and was able to process, I'm sure, dozens of people through their clinic on surgery days, such that I could go in and be out of there having had one cataract removed and a lens replaced in my eye in less than 45 minutes from start to finish. And I was on that chair for 5 minutes. Honestly, I heard my surgeon, but I never actually saw my surgeon myself. He talked to me when I was on the chair. I was conscious, fully conscious or anything, but never met him. And perhaps in a sense, that's less of a transaction in that I'm on the chair. I'm more or less disabled. My face is covered. I can't see things. I'm certainly not in a position to tell him how to do his job or how not to do his job, and wouldn't pretend to be able to do that. And yet, And so basically, he goes about his business, and I'm the recipient of the service, and that's the way it stays. I was there, he provided the service, I left, and that's sort of the way it was. I was the patient, he was the professional. In human services, our interaction is very different, and we may indeed use a medical model in treating our clients, seeing them as the ones who need our help and providing that help. But even in that framework, and I'm not sure that's the best framework to use, even in that framework, we are in a transaction with our clients. We give, they give. We give, they give. It's an interaction, and so we have to be able to make use of ourselves. My surgeon, my eye surgeon, may not need to work through any of his issues, and so in order to perform his surgery brilliantly as he does, although I hope that at least he's got his head on his shoulders and he's concentrating what he's doing when I'm in his chair. But when we're working with people, they're interacting with us as a whole human being, not as a person with the scalpel that we're totally dependent upon, and so, or that they're totally dependent upon. And so it's very, very important for us to be aware of that give and take, and to know what it is that we have to give, and also to develop a sense of personal objectivity regarding other people who may see things differently from us. We have a need to relate meaningfully to each other, and this certainly includes our clients as well as the workers. And in order for us to be able to use our own capacity, which we have inside of ourselves, to relate to others, sometimes we have to do a sort of a re-education and basically becoming aware of ourselves and who we are and what motivates us. And this is some of what she is attempting to have us look at as she goes through this particular chapter. Now, one of the things that impacts us greatly is our culture, and as you know, cultures are that really kind of dictate how we act, how we think, how we feel, even if we feel. How we respond to situations and those kinds of things, and the cultures spell out how we are to behave in certain situations. Some cultures are more emotionally expressive, others are much more inhibited emotionally. Some cultures have very strict rules for conducts and behaviors. Others are much more loose and accepting of the differences among people and how they want to act. Some cultures expect certain things from males. Other cultures expect some of those things from females, and vice versa. And so our culture and other people's cultures, our clients' cultures, dictate patterns and ways of behaving in response to any situation. And we learn these things not only from our family, and certainly our parents are an important key element in our learning our culture, but we also get it in the other institutions in our society, such as the educational institution, the church, the legal system, the media, the peer group, and those kinds of things. And so our culture is very important to us, and not only knowing what our culture teaches us, but also what our clients' culture has taught them is one of those key elements in being able to be effective with other people. So there are then some very basic questions that we need to ask ourselves, and this is really the focus of the remainder of Levine's chapter this week, is being aware of what's going on inside of us. For instance, how do I think and feel about myself? The ability to be comfortable with myself is one of those things that is based on a number of different factors, and is very, very important if I'm going to be able to be of assistance to others. How do I deal with my own fundamental needs? Those are things like, it says here, the need for security, the need to accommodate the drive towards growth, in all sorts of spheres of our life, the emotional, physical, intellectual, social, and spiritual realm. These are, and I might add that the spiritual realm is something that is often missed in American society in particular, yet is very, very important in many other cultural societies. And I would posit that the spiritual realm is equally as important in our own lives, even if we don't always recognize it. But the Levine talks about 5 different areas in our lives that we really need to nurture and allow to develop towards growth. How do I provide for my own basic human needs? Food, shelter, those kinds of things, but also loving and being loved, a sense of security, a sense of independence. And do I lack any of those particular needs? Because if I lack those needs, the fundamental needs, the basic human needs, this may impact also what I look for in my relationship with my clients. very important thing. What is my value system, and how does my value system define my behavior and my relationships with other people? Those of you that have taken Social Work 106 with me, Introduction to Social Welfare, read Phyllis Day's text, and she identifies 9 essential American values that underlie our attitudes about ourselves and other people, and ultimately our clients and how they're doing. And 4 of those values really are here, perhaps a combination of a few more thrown in there. But Levine talks about the Judeo-Christian doctrine, that is that sense of charity and giving, basically that that we should help those in need, those kinds of things. That's sort of a value that exists for most every American. We have this kind of driven into us or drilled into us as children. Drilled is probably the wrong word, but what I'm saying is it's worked into our own fabric of our being from very, very early years. Democratic ideals, and some of that means freedom to make our own choices and to be independent and to stand on our own, but it's also an expectation of standing on one's own, and that means that we have this belief that everybody can be successful if they only try to be successful. We all have equal opportunity, those kinds of things. And if you don't know now, you'll know by the end of the semester, and I think you already know, that this is simply not the case. I mean, we have that value, we believe in these things, and yet the reality is that not everybody has equal opportunity, not everyone can stand on their own. And in fact, those of us that think we stand on our own aren't really standing on our own as much as we think we are. The Puritan ethic, firstly, involves morality and behavior, how we should act, and that kind of bleeds over into our treatment sometimes and our views about people, for instance, who are sexually promiscuous or who have an alternate sexual orientation, or who abuse substances, who abuse alcohol, those kinds, perhaps go through a series of marriages and those kinds of things. Or who don't get married. We see these individuals through this lens that suggests that there may be something immoral or unacceptable about the choices in their lives, if they're choices or their lifestyles. It also, I think, entails the other thing about the Puritan ethic is, I think, closely connected to that is the Protestant work ethic, which says, that it's moral to work, and that if you're not working, it's immoral. And by association, the person who is unemployed is immoral. And then social Darwinism, in the sense that since we can all take care of ourselves in a society, since we all can be independent and we all can be successful, we all can climb that ladder of economic opportunity if we just work hard enough, because we have that in the sense of our core. We believe that, and if you're American, you believe that. Even if you haven't succeeded, you believe you should have succeeded is generally how it is. And so anyway, out of this grows this social Darwinism, this sense that if people aren't taking care of themselves, society has no obligation to help them, and the individual has no right to expect help from society. We certainly see that at play in the political arena day in and day out on the news, I'm sad to say. So these are some values that Levine suggests are really sort of central to all of us as Americans. And we may take exception to these values intellectually. I hope you do. I certainly do, at least in most cases. But I also know that deep inside myself, or maybe not too deep inside myself, how I was raised, what I was taught to believe, really rests on these values. And so somewhere inside, when I'm not thinking perhaps, but I'm just reacting, these values are at play. And they can impact the way I interact with my clients, even if I'm not fully aware of it, especially if I'm not fully aware of it. And so this is something that we need to be cognizant of in our own lives and in our own being, and, just keep tuned into these things, because it really can impact how we form relationships with clients. The other thing, of course, is that, as I mentioned here, the choices of clients can violate our own values. And so we have to be aware of what those values are and conscious of our own biases, and be aware that those biases and those values if unchecked, not, if not, if we're not aware of them, that they can really negatively impact our interactions with clients. And I think very correctly, the author suggests that if we're comfortable with ourselves, who we are, how we get our needs met, what our values are, those kinds of things, it's much more likely that we're going to be able to be comfortable in accepting the values and lifestyles and choices that others make when they differ from our own. Another question, what is my lifestyle? Now, this kind of moves into a personal realm, and there are a lot of people in the field who believe that one's personal life should not be brought into work and on in your relationship with your clients. That it should be separate. That you're professional, and therefore, when clients start asking you questions about your life and who you are, rather than responding to those questions, some people suggest that we explore the reasons why the clients want to know those things, and there's validity to that. You'll hear that during your training, and I'm not telling you to dispel those thoughts or those beliefs, but I also think that in order to be genuine with others, we have to be open to some degree at least about our own lives. Now, does that mean that clients need to know our secrets and our most intimate details and those kinds of things? Absolutely not. And those are inappropriate things to bring clients into, but the clients will come to know, particularly if you're working in a smaller community. But if you're working with somebody over a period of time, it's natural for the client to become to be aware of certain things about your own life, and so your lifestyle choices sometimes can affect your ability to help clients, and so. Be cognizant of that, be aware of any of those conflicts that may occur with particular clients, and be prepared to deal with that. Sometimes it may be necessary. You may need to say to a supervisor that I'm not sure that I'm the person to be able to work with this individual. Either my own values really are coming into play and I can't see this person objectively, or the client is rejecting me because of whatever they know about me or something like that. But a lot of times just being aware of this, it doesn't really have to have a major impact on things, but it can. But other things like, how do you deal with conflict? This is another lifestyle kind of a thing. Are you comfortable with disagreement? Can you say no to people? Are you able to negotiate conflicts across cultural bounds and cultural boundaries? This is where I think we need to be honest with ourselves about the prejudices that we have about others, other groups, and things like this. All of us have some prejudices. It's something we want to fix. It's something we want to correct. It's something we want to overcome. But it's not something we have to be ashamed of because it's a part of our humanity. We need to be honest with ourselves about what our prejudices are. What cultures, what information we don't have about other people, other groups that we need to get, those kinds of things. And an important thing, for instance, is knowing differences in how other persons approach conflict. For instance, I mentioned here the individualistic versus collectivist societies, and if you haven't run into this concept in any of your coursework yet, the world, according to some theorists at least, the world is kind of divided up into two different kinds of groups. There are societies that are individualistic and societies that are collectivist, and it impacts the way they approach virtually everything in life. And I have to narrow this down to something I can tell you in about 60 or 90 seconds. But for instance, in an individualistic culture, parents raise their children to look towards success, and to become independent on their own at 18 or 21 or wherever it might be. To they raise their kids to be competitive to a certain extent so they can succeed in the work environment when other people are competing for the same job. To better themselves and to seek pleasure and leisure and those kinds of things. Our culture is an individualistic culture in that respect, but other cultures raise their kids not so much to be individually successful, but rather to be to become successful so that they contribute back to the family unit. That collectivist, there's that collectivist idea that the individual's responsibility is to give back to the family that has helped raise them. My Chinese student several years ago, that was very much the expectation, that he was here on exchange, not so much to be on a cultural exchange as it was, I learned during the course of the year, because his parents and his grandparents invested much in him coming over and becoming educated in American university so that he could go back to China, not only help to take care of them because they do have intergenerational caretaking patterns, but also because he can give back to Chinese society that way. And so that's just one example of this. I think that many of the Asian cultures and the South American, African cultures and more traditional societies tend to be more collectivist in nature, that the individual's responsibility is to the group first and the individual second. That's quite unlike those of us in industrialized societies. And there's just a whole number of things. I could speak for a whole lecture and then some on some of the differences between collectivist and individualistic cultures. But one of the things that differs from culture to culture is how comfortable individuals can be with conflict, because many cultures, particularly those collectivist cultures, confrontation is not something that's okay. They can't make eye contact with you, because if they do, eye contact in our society and in many individualistic cultures is considered a sign of respect when you make contact with somebody who's speaking with you. But in other cultures, it's seen as quite the opposite, disrespect. And asserting oneself, which is something that's a value in our individualistic culture, is in other cultures considered to be offensive and disrespectful again. And so you cannot always expect your clients from other cultures to be able to deal with conflicts the way you're used to dealing with it. And even if you believe our way of dealing with conflict is the healthiest thing, as it seems to be because this is how we grew up, that is not how they grew up, and that is not their beliefs. And so we need to be conscious of those kinds of differences in our cultures as we talk about settling conflict, and as we try to help people from other cultures settle conflicts in their own lives that doesn't involve us personally. Now, if you're the kind of person who has some issues with conflict and asserting yourself and being able to say no and draw the line with clients, or individuals, I should say, in your life, assertiveness training is something that can really be helpful to you, and it's something that I would encourage you to consider pursuing at some point, so that you develop those skills to be able to deal with conflict constructively. You have to be able to be comfortable in encountering disagreements and managing disagreements in the social work field. And so this is something that would be useful for many people. How do I relate to society in which I live and work? What is your position in your society? What groups and subgroups do you belong with in society? What are your roles in those groups? What are your statuses? These are things that affect our perceptions. If you have, as many of us have, grown up in families where we were relatively financially secure as we grew up, and we never were hungry, and our parents had jobs throughout our lives and were able to help us go through school, and we've had the means, the financial means to, whether it's even with a lot of loans, to get to school and to pursue our own education. There's a whole element, a whole stratus of society out there that can't do that. And when we work with those individuals, they may see us as being much more privileged than we see ourselves being. Later in this semester, I'm going to have you read an article, I believe, that I know some of you have read for me in other classes, and you may have read in other classes as well, but it's on white privilege, and that's another thing, that the privilege that whatever group you belong to, whether it's a racial group or an ethnic group, if you're in the dominant group, you have a privilege, and this includes gender as well, so that also sexual orientation. Heterosexuals also have a kind of a leg up in many environments. Males have a leg up because of patriarchy. Whites have a leg up in our society because of the color of their skin. Northern Europeans, because of their ethnic backgrounds, have also a kind of a status that is automatic that not even every other Caucasian culture gets in our society. These are things, membership in these groups give you privileges, and if you don't see those privileges, you can be sure that the members of the groups that are in the minorities that don't have those privileges see it in you. And so this is another area for exploration and self-awareness as to how we connect in our society and how our group relates to other groups in society. Be aware of where you belong and how that may impact things. What is our basic philosophy? The philosophical base for human services that Levine says involves a number of things that we're social animals, essentially, that we're all interrelated with ourselves and with each other and with really the environment. Both the needs of the group and the individual have to be considered in working with others. We can't just service an individual and ignore everybody else around him or her. That we all have a drive to grow and fulfill our own potentials. That's very humanistic kind of psychology, basic, but I believe it's very, very true. Carl Rogers, very famous psychologist who was a humanist in the humanist field of thought and psychology, said that, when you ask yourself the question, who am I? You can never really answer that question until you die, because who you are is never going to be complete until you reach that point, because we are always in the process of becoming who we're going to be. And so growth doesn't stop at 18 or 25 or 55 or 70. So we all have the need to continue to strive to fulfill our potential, that we all have a need to be understood, we all have the capacity to change. These are basic ideas in human services and social work that, I think a person working in this field really has to be able to subscribe to himself or herself as well. If you get to the point where you believe that there's no hope for your clients, that your clients can never change, maybe time to think about at least a change in a venue for your work, because we can change. And there's some conflict with that if you've taken basic psychology courses, for instance, when we talk about diagnoses and personality disorders. One of the things that you learn in working with personality disordered individuals is that that's never going to change. That's a fixed and static part of who they are. And that what you do is you teach those clients to negotiate the world in a way that those personality traits don't intrude on their ability to be successful and to relate to others more successfully, but that those will never change. That's one of the things that the field of psychology and really in therapy in many respects, that's sort of the mainstream thought about those things, but that conflicts with the idea about us all having a capacity to change, doesn't it? So these are some things to think about and it's one of those things that will be a challenge to you throughout your career. It remains challenges for me to reconcile some of those differences. What do I present? What do I represent to those with whom I work? We have to know ourselves. We have to know what we present to others as well when we work, so that sometimes who we are in reality is not how others perceive us, and how others perceive us will dictate sometimes how they react to us based upon their perceptions. So this is sort of a roundabout thing, and how do you deal with that? Well, I think it's your deeds and your words, as this slide suggests, that if we see that others don't see us exactly as we are, we take a look at that and try to find ways to correct misunderstandings that others might have about us, so that we can really establish who we are with individuals. We, as this slide says, we all give hints to our through our behaviors and our words and things like that as to how we see ourselves, and so how we present ourselves sometimes is going to define how people treat us. It's just another thing to be aware of. And so that's really, I believe, the end of the chapter, and a pretty quick presentation of what's in there. These are some good soul-searching questions for us, though, as we go about the business of working with people and helping others. And this is just a very basic introduction, very, very basic ideas, but something maybe to start thinking about and asking yourself about as the semester goes along. Let me know if this provokes any thoughts or any